good morning, Kate, and welcome to the Great Big Book Club. Here's your book, The Truants.
Oh,
It's about to come out in paperback. And this book is brilliant. It's very clever. It's very well constructed. It's part thriller, part coming of age, part crime story. Can we start by you telling us a bit about the story and the plot?
Yes. Hi, Charlotte. The reason it's a bit of a jumble of genre is because as a writer, I basically can't choose between character and story, and all my favourite books hit that sweet spot where you don't know whether it's character driven or you don't know whether it's plot driven, and I was sort of searching and rootling around for that. But it follows the story of Jess Walker, who's an undergraduate who is in the thrall of this sort of brilliant and unconventional female professor, and she goes to the University of Norfolk, which is thinly disguised UEA, where I went as a postgrad, and gets sort of entangled and in lots of relationships that she shouldn't. And it then sort of spins off onto a Mediterranean island, a remote Mediterranean island for the last third. And the book starts 6 years after most of the action has taken place, and Jess is looking back, and we know something really awful has happened. So hopefully there's a sort of note of suspense that pulls you through the book. But it starts upbeat with all these characters engaging in undergraduate life with their normal anxieties, and Jess is just a very ordinary undergraduate.
You certainly seem to have a lot of fun with the whole undergraduate experience, the drug taking, the bunking off lectures, the sex, and yes, even the seminar titles, which really amused me. There's one that was Miss Marple's Revenge, Feminism in the Rose Garden. How was it creating this world of the university? Was it a reflection of your own undergraduate experience?
It was actually quite a lot of wishful thinking. My undergraduate, I had a nice time as an undergraduate, but it wasn't a particularly thrilling or exciting time. I went as an undergraduate, having read so many campus novels. I've always loved them, that I was sort of doomed to have a really boring time, because by the time I arrived, I was sort of looking for those kind of dazzling friendships and actually a mentor pretty much like the one I created, that would sort of open up my mind and make me and challenge me and make me sort of see the world in a different way. And of course I didn't find that, so I ended up many years later writing about it instead.
So Lorna Clay is the tutor, who our main character, Jess Walker, is sort of intellectually seduced by after reading yes, her book before she goes to the college. And this mentor-student relationship is with a sort of genius teacher. It's been the theme of a few books, and recently a number of popular books, including My Dark Vanessa and Conversations with Friends. And I wondered why this sort of relationship intrigued you, and whether or not it was sort of familiar territory, and how you researched it.
Yes, good question. There are kind of two answers to that question, and the first is that I've always either wanted or had a female mentor in my life, and that's probably no accident, because I lost my mother when I was very small, and I've always been drawn towards strong older female characters. But then there's a second part, which is when after having had my slightly dreary undergraduate experience, I had a second bite of the cherry. I went and did a master's in creative writing at UEA, where the novel is set. And I had this sort of amazing stroke of good fortune, because there I was taught, not in creative writing, but actually the literature side, by this incredible woman, Lorna Sage, who is a famous literary critic, was a famous literary critic, but sort of this incredibly irreverent, mischievous, sort of feminist who didn't take us, who sort of took herself intellectually really seriously, but had this sort of brilliant sense of humour and this sort of topsy-turvy way of looking at the world. And she was really everything I'd always been looking for as an undergraduate, and she had this profound effect on me. You know, she took me a little bit under her wing, but obviously, as is often the case in those sort of mentor-student relationships, she definitely meant a lot more to me than I did to her. But my kind of worldview was really, really sort of shaken and changed. And she was very sick, which I didn't realise while she was teaching. She always had kind of vodka in her bottom drawer and smoked fags, and so I kind of didn't realise that actually she was dying of emphysema. And shortly after I left, she did die, and I was really cut up. And a colleague on the writing course said to me, you know, one day you'll write about her. And it took a long while, but I did. I mean, the character is not, to correct that, because I pushed her into a much more ambiguous area morally. But all the kind of lighter shades and the effect she has, the effect of kind of lighting up a room and switching on your brain and making you think differently, that was all pulled from the real life Lorna Sage.
So there's also this strong undercurrent of female friendship, and this is a sort of much celebrated subject these days. And
I like the way you say celebrated.
Yes, I know. Well, yes, I'm slightly cynical about the whole thing, and but you know, I'm cynical about it because female friendship can, as we know, be a dark and dangerous thing. You know, who we choose, how much they influence us, betray us, use us, or we them, and so on. So I sort of found this quite interesting in your book, because you choose to portray female friendship in this, in that way. There's a strong sort of boys before buddies element, but that's honest, not even though it's not fashionable, and it's just the dynamic between the female characters is quite interesting.
Thank you. So one of the many blows that I had when I was writing my books, it took so long, was that my after I got to a sort of draft which I thought was reasonable, I handed it over to my husband to read, and he read it and said, you know what, you're just not really very interested in men. And his view was that the sort of main male character, Alec, I just sort of, at that point, I really hadn't kind of found any sort of depth or credibility for him. But I was having an enormous amount of fun with the female relationships, as you say, and sort of pushing them in lots of different directions. You know, not as you say, not to kind of saccharine female friendship that might sort of typify that kind of undergraduate, that sort of trope of girls sort of giggling and having lots of fun together and sort of whispering in corners. You know, I really wanted to kind of put lots of texture in it, and actually, I part company with my narrator's choices when it comes to some of the things she decides around friendships, but I can imagine them, and I think there's in all really deep, close relationships, you know, you consider people negatively, you dance long lines of betrayal whether it comes to just the way you talk about your friends or the way that you I don't know, the kind of your sort of loyalty and how much you're in touch with them. There are sort of so many ways that you are engaging and compromising with your female friends all the time in sort of small nuanced ways. So I just wanted to kind of push that into a really dramatic action and see what happened.
Yeah, no, it's
but anyway, in the end, having been rather downcast about this idea that I couldn't create male characters, I had a brainwave which was, how about if I use the psychology of a woman I know to infuse the male character? So I went back and wrote another draft where I had this person in mind when I was making Alec speak and act, and he sort of popped into life for me.
Oh, that's quite interesting, because actually he is, I mean, that, well, I don't want to give anything away, but there is a strong elements of coercive control in the book, and that's obviously something that we associate perhaps more with men. And wait,
yeah.
What can I say here without ruining the plot?
Yeah, no. I kind of play with it with a few of the character dynamics, and I kind of wanted to explore, and I guess this shows my age, but having always been really interested in mentors and what they do for the younger person in the relationship. As I was writing it, I became really interested in what my mentor character Lorna was getting out of it. You know, what was propelling her, and how was she feeding off it in some way. So I kind of look at how the sort of power exchange from both sides of the relationship. And when I write drafts, this is probably why it took me so blooming long, but I'll often go and I'll do another draft with I'll put one of the characters into the center of the draft. So I'll have Lorna's draft, and then I'll have Jess's draft, and then I'll have Alec's draft, where I'm trying to put everything through their lens, and see the story a little bit differently. Because as we all know, if you put a few people in a room, everyone's got a different script running through their head. Yeah.
There's that energy about youth, and that really comes through with these young people. I mean, you know, reading about how we were at university, or weren't, how we fantasized about the university.
Maybe you were.
No, I was in the library the whole time. I was a really boring Scot. So but youth is a very sort of, you know, the energy of youth is a very sort of intoxicating thing when you, as you get older, and you wonder if you didn't use your own power
energy wisely. Yeah, and I think a lot of older people do tap into that, and want young people around for exactly that reason, you know, and there is an exchange between the energy and the experience, which is incredibly positive, and I hope that I show that in the book. You know, that's the thing that I've actually only personally had incredibly positive experiences of female mentors, but I also wanted to play around with the kind of more sort of sinister, dark corners of it as well.
So love is a big theme, obviously.
I thought you were calling me love then.
Love.
Love.
So love is a big theme, and what love is, and how our childhood experiences shape how we define what love is. All the characters have these complicated backgrounds, and you show that. And that's what I always, obviously we like that. We like to know where people's motives and understanding of humans come from, and that childhood element. But can you talk a bit about that?
Well, you said it rather well. I mean, when I'm building characters, normally the first thing I do is look around for some kind of defining childhood experience, and sometimes that won't appear in the book at all. I say sometimes as if I've written lots of novels, and actually, as we know, I've only written one. So it's sounding much grander. But when I'm creating individual characters, I do often look for that defining experience, because, you know, personally, I feel like that is a sort of often for people, whether they're kind of joined up or they're not joined up people, and whether they're conscious of it or not, that is often the sort of strongest emotional lens that we're sort of putting against a lot of our relationships and choices. So anyway, it's the easiest way I find to get in touch with my characters. And all the characters in the Truants have strong, there are sort of episodes in all of their lives when they were younger, some of which appear written, some of which appear backstory, which are kind of pulling their strings in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, and some of them are really intriguing. I wish that you really want to know more, don't you? Particularly Alex. And then another theme in the novel is vanishing acts, and it sort of introduces the mystery of Agatha Christie, because Agatha Christie is a big sort of influence, and it introduces the mystery of her disappearance in real life, and then points all the characters take leave from their own lives, and Truancy is of course an act of going AWOL. So talk to us about this, because it's a very interesting theme.
Yeah, so I've literally always been obsessed with this 11-day episode in Agatha Christie's life when it's sort of almost too good to be true. The writer herself went missing. She completely vanished for 11 days. A lot of people, a lot of all Christie nuts know this, but not everyone does. It was in 1926. It appears in the book because Lorna teaches a module on Agatha Christie. And Christie was her husband Archie told her that he was in love with another woman, and the next day Agatha disappeared. Her car was parked on the side of the road, and the whole country was sort of looking for her. There were headlines around the world, and this sort of mystery writer had vanished and presumed dead. People didn't know whether her husband had done it or what had happened, whether it was some kind of publicity exercise for the murder of Roger Ackroyd, which was coming out that year. But I think I was either sort of 9 or 10 when I did an English exam at school, and the oral English exam, which I think was called the English Speaking Board, and you had to choose a subject, and I chose Agatha Christie, and I found out about this episode, this 11-day episode. And I remember planting a question with a friend in class saying, when it came up, which is, did Agatha Christie ever disappear? So I was always really interested in it. And as I was writing the novel, I realized that the truancy, as you pointed out, it had started off in my mind as about rule breaking, about tearing up the rule book, which sort of Lorna is a great proponent of, and trying to find a less ordinary life, trying to be kind of more, go against the grain, even if there's collateral damage, and lead some kind of extraordinary life. And as I was writing the book, which took a while, I realized that the real truancy that I was interested in was people not being where they were supposed to be, kind of performing a vanishing act in their own life. So Agatha Christie is central to that, but all the characters in the book form different kinds of vanishing acts, and it's something that I'm really interested in. And I think women in particular have this fantasy of disappearing, of running out on their lives, because they're so surrounded by obligation and need, and there's that kind of burn the house down sort of fantasy where you get your freedom back. And without spoiling the plot, there are different kinds of disappearing that happen towards the end of the book.
Yeah, physical and I suppose sort of emotional. Yeah. Yeah. What was I going to ask you? Oh yes, A standout question has to be, have you met a lot of highly manipulative people in your life? Because there is a darkness
Yes.
in some of your characters.
Yeah. So like I said, when I was rebuilding the Alec character, I did base him on, I had someone in mind who is coercively very controlling. But I actually, the honest answer is, I am fascinated by emotional and psychological control, and I think it's really interesting that the law has managed to kind of identify it now. But I avoid people that are like that as much as I can. You know, my friendships are often, and my relationships, they're very sort of pure, and they don't involve people with edges and sides, because I just don't manage it very well. I have had some experience of it, and I'm a bit allergic to it. So but you know, it's obviously something that I think about and interests me, and I think that it will probably always be a theme in what I write, and all those sort of invisible abuses that go on in relationships, and can leave bigger scars than physical ones.
Yeah, it's a great subject. So let's talk about the book and the process on a sort of technical level. It's written in the first person.
Mm-hmm.
How useful was it to use this observer narrator to tell this story?
So I've got a terrible memory when it comes to the sort of building blocks of the book. But there was a draft that existed where Jess, my narrator, didn't exist at all. There was Lorna and Alec, and that was the sort of main dynamic. But it didn't work at all because, well, for various plot reasons, but also I have always loved the observer narrator. I've loved that kind of intimacy of the first person. It's, you know, it's a seduction as a reader. You know, they pull you in.
First person, though, isn't it?
So I find it easier than third person. I know you're more of a third person writer, but I like to sort of clamber inside one character and sort of put some of myself into it too, but also bring in things that feel quite alien to me, in order not to get to the point where I identify with them and can't make them make choices that I wouldn't. So, but yeah, I've always loved books where you have an observer narrator who's quite dazzled by the characters who are more center stage, and is sort of keeps kind of ricocheting off people, and the books that I was drawn to when I grew up often had those characters, but they were often men, and I wanted her to be one of those characters who was not only a woman herself, but the main characters. I mean, there's a mixture, but the really main character she's enthralled to is another woman.
We've written together over the years, so obviously I've seen many drafts of this book. But one of the things I know about so one of the things I know about this novel, and we're both in the same boat on this, you've stuck at it. You've been angry about it. You've dismissed it. You've come back to it. You know, you've wrestled with it. You've wrestled with the characters. It's absolutely brilliant. But it's a project that's been with you for 20 years. So can you tell us about the importance of sticking with it, and how and what got you through that process to this precise version?
So 20 years, I'd say I've been trying to write for 20 years on and off, sort of round other jobs, but this book took me a mere 7. But no, in my view, and because of the kind of writer I am, which is slow, it's a stamina game. And once I realised what book I wanted to write, I then went through various drafts of this one before I even got a publishing deal. And each one did feel like a mountain to climb. And I think if I'd known that there was a range of mountains and that there was a series more that I had to climb, I might well have given up. But I sort of thought of each draft as the final one. And I think that kind of self-delusion helped a bit. But yeah, I'll never, almost every writer I know struggles with that feeling of getting stuck and giving it up, and not seeing the point and not really having enough self-worth as a writer. And I guess the thing I'm most proud of is that I did just finish it. You know, I got it across the line, sort of panting and exhausted, but managed to kind of push it across. And a lot of that was to do with people around me. And I'm lucky enough that both my sisters are writers. I've always been in writing groups, as you know, and having a writing community around helps a hell of a lot, and being held to account by, you know, whether it's a weekly class or a kind of phone call with a friend once a week, which is what I'm doing during lockdown. It really helps for me that it's not completely in isolation.
You have this sort of wonderful magpie style where you layer up all the details, and this book is sort of, you know, there's sort of shiny bits everywhere, the sort of academic detail, the popular culture, there's a bit of seismology, there's a medieval story about a man who disappeared from a town square, there's some South African history, there's some crucial medicine, some Agatha Christie style medicine. So can you sort of talk a bit about how you sort of take all these little bits and sort of nest, make your little structure?
One of the advantages of having cat just disappeared down the chair.
Sorry.
One of the advantages of having taken a while, she says, understatement, is that I had lots of layers to play with, and there have been kind of various things that have interested me through the years, and some short stories found their way into the book in the form of kind of digressions in characters, stories they tell or jobs they have. So I've kind of been able to make a bit of a layer cake of stuff, and I think some of that, what propelled me to do that, was this sort of desperation that the kind of years hadn't gone to waste. You know, that you could see in these years, oh, there's 1999.
Did you actually work in a pet shop?
No, but I tried to once in Verona. I was working in Verona, and I tried. I think I got turned down for a job in a pet shop. But I've always found that there's something about the smell of pet shops, and you know, there's something sort of very vivid about all these trapped animals. So I did, when I was writing it, go and sort of wander rather oddly around a few of them to remind myself of what they felt like. But yeah, so much of the book are just piecemeal bits of my life that I've thought, okay, I want to feel that I put them somewhere. You know, I don't write diaries. I'm very bad at photo albums, but if you read my novel and you know me, you'll see all sorts of bits of my life kind of stacked up in it.
Now, another big challenge for writers is children, and
Yeah.
you managed to write around having children, and how
Hear them outside the door in the last question. I could sort of hear the sort of snack area being rummaged through. So apologies if you heard that.
no, I didn't, but I've got the cat.
Yeah.
But, how was it to sort of, I mean, that those 7 years, you know, your children have been very small, so how was fitting writing around that? Was it, you know,
Yeah,
difficult?
well, actually, it neatly coincides with having had children. So I had all this time in my 20s well, I had a lot of free time and got nothing done, and then got really, really busy with both jobs and the business of popping out babies. And actually, it was only then that I really got into a rhythm. And for me, there's been this sort of it's incredibly hard to write with small children, but it's had a bit of a kind of reverse pram in the hallway effect. You know, there's that phrase "pram in the
Yeah.
hallway," that once it's there, you're kind of a bit stuffed in the young years creatively, and that the sort of banality of all the ritual and the, you know, the huge amount you have to do. But actually, I found it really helpful because I'm a really unstructured person, and suddenly I had these little bite-sized amounts of time to write in, and I also really needed a refuge. I needed a place to go to in my head, especially when they were tiny. Actually, it worked bizarrely well for me, and it's been challenging in lockdown because I'm homeschooling and I'm trying to research and make a bit of headway on my second novel. So I've gone back to that early feeling of yikes, I've got an hour, I've got to get it done, which is both stressful and helpful in my case.
Oh my God, you're so self-disciplined. It puts me to shame. I was going to ask as well about publishing, and you know how much, and then we should talk about your new book. But just on the publishing front, how much sort of, you know, what's the process in terms of how much do they get involved in the editing and the in how the book changes? What's that like?
So I love working with editors because after having spent years sort of hacking away at something in a room on my own, the idea that someone would get engaged with the life of my characters and really kind of get involved in the book on a line by line is sort of thrilling and inspiring because you know it's your special subject, you can talk about it, you can you've suddenly got another judgment to bounce things off. And in my case, I got really lucky, which is I got after my UK publishing deal, I also got a deal in the US, and I got two fabulously strong female editors, both of whom had different strengths as editors, and both of whom gave me lots of feedback while I kind of wrote the last couple of drafts, and were, you know, incredibly helpful and inspiring, and didn't sort of inspired me rather than anything else. In that, you know, it wasn't so much a kind of hacking away at sentences as opening things up in my mind about character dynamics, and so that I'd sort of go back off and write a new draft charged with new possibilities. So it got really busy that last year, where trying to balance all the different input but it was brilliant. I loved it. I loved that process at the end.
I wonder that your next book, is it memoir or fiction?
No, it's fiction as well, very much fiction. Though I'm going to be drawing much more on my own life.
Do you think the second book is the book you really want to write more than any book?
Yeah. It's quite a scary one for me. You know, it goes to sort of rather painful places. To put it mildly, it comes from the lack of having had a mother, it's about a
What age
character.
were you when your mother died?
So I was 3.5, and so I really know very little about her, and actually the character in my next book is trying to find out what happened to her mother. I suppose there's a similar thing to the Truants in that I'm using a bit of my life and things that didn't happen to me and I didn't know, and using it as a sort of proxy of imagining what it would have been like. But yeah, no, I'm really incredibly energized by this story, because I feel that in the writing of it and the thinking of it, it's sort of moving me on personally. It will be, I think it will be a really important, it's sort of part of my life emotionally as well as professionally to write this.
And is it set in South Africa to begin with?
Yeah, no, it's my character is English like me, and her mother character is South African like mine was, and a lot of it takes place in the backstory takes place in 1970s South Africa. So I'm doing a lot of research into that, and part of the book takes place in modern day Johannesburg, and it explores the aspects of Jewish society under apartheid South Africa, and collusion and denial, and but it's also focused on a young woman, older than Jess actually, sort of mid-30s rather than late teens, but a young woman with a lot to discover.
How much of your childhood did you spend in South Africa? Was it? Were you born?
Not at all. Yeah, no, I had a grandmother there who I'd visit. Well, actually, there was a long period where we didn't get to visit her, but from sort of my mid-teens onwards. But actually, part of the reason I wanted to write this is because I don't know enough about South Africa. My eldest sister lived out there for a bit, so she took me recently on a research trip, and we bombed around Johannesburg for a couple of weeks, and a week or so, and we kind of looked at places that had family connections there, and she kind of went into the country's history. So all of that's been amazing, being able to kind of dig into that.
And do you feel like you're slightly getting to know your mother as part of the process?
Yeah, I mean, whether I'm getting to know my mother or getting to a version that I've created for her is sort of really what the book's about, and certainly the character who is getting to know her mother is finding more about herself along the way. But yeah, I'm in touch with her, and I feel pretty exposed when I'm writing it.
Yeah, it must be. And final question, I just wondered how that was for the rest of your family, for your father, because writing, even if it is fictionalized about things that, the whole, that affect other people as well, I just wondered how it was for them to experience you going back over that time, which must have been
hard. That's I mean, we shall see, because I haven't written it yet, but I've certainly spoken to my sisters a lot about it, and my dad knows I'm writing it. It's not memoir, so it is. I'm lucky enough that I get to sort of take it off into a completely different imaginative route, but I'm certainly kind of prodding away at a bruise, a kind of sort of family sore. And luckily I've got a really sort of generous, I've got a generous family who want to support me, both emotionally and professionally. But we'll see how that one goes. It's going to be an interesting one to navigate.
Yeah. Why did you decide not to do it as memoir?
I just like writing fiction. I like I like taking emotional truths and then putting them into a completely different world. So in a way, the memoir aspect of it is that I am plundering myself, but I get to sort of have more fun with the actual sort of scenes, and there is something really cathartic about making things happen that didn't happen, and exploring, it's like sliding doors. What would have happened if I was me and then I went off and did that? So you get to kind of have lots of different proxy lives, which for me is a no-brainer.
I know, so much fun, especially in lockdown.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so we'll finish there, and it's a great book. Let me just hold it up again.
Oh, thank
And
you.
it's Waterstone's Book of the Month, and available at, where is it available?
I
On
think
this website.
yes.
On this website.
Well, thank you so much.
So thank you.